Hi, I'm Rebecca Bradley. This is the Virtual Crime Book Club. The date is Monday, the 10th of July, 2023. This month, we are discussing Silenced by Sólveig Pálsdóttir, translated by Quentin Bates, and the book is there. We are lucky enough to have both Sólveig and Quentin with us today. Spoilers will be discussed, so if you are watching this as the video, be aware you may want to read the book or finish reading the book before you continue. We are going to talk to Quentin first for 10 minutes, then Sólveig, and then we'll have the group meeting. So Quentin, you are lucky enough to have me doing the questions. So I read a quick bio that I have nabbed off your website. So I don't know how up to date it is.
Not very.
Okay. Quentin dates back to the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He grew up in English suburbia and escaped for a few years. His roots in Iceland run very deep, and the pull of its volcanic rock remain strong. Having been a factory hand, net maker, trawlerman, truck driver briefly, and a teacher, he found his way into writing via a series of coincidences and has been tapping away at a keyboard ever since, including writing a series of crime novels and novellas set in Iceland and translating the work of many Icelandic writers into English, including Sólveig's. Okay, thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. It's going to be 10 minutes, hopefully. I always say that, I tend to underestimate, so fingers crossed. Okay, you grew up in English suburbia.
Yep.
What drew you to Iceland?
I had the opportunity to do a gap year. This was back when you still could do gap years. And once I'd been there for a few months, my A-level results came through and I'd pretty much screwed up any chance of going to university. So I just stayed there. So the gap year became a gap decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
And once there then, how did you go about learning the language?
Just talking to people. I was working in a factory where, to start with, I was working in a factory where most of the staff were older people. So they didn't speak English as a second language. Their second language was Danish. So there was an awful lot of messing around like that and drawing diagrams and the little pocket dictionary and all the rest of it. So I didn't really have much choice but to learn fairly quickly.
So which is easier, learning the verbal language or the text?
I don't know really, because I learned just by talking to people to start with, and reading came quite a bit later. It took quite a few years before I actually started reading. Sort of 3 or 4 years before I started reading regularly. But just started with newspapers and magazines and things like that. And then just sort of got into it gradually. And I went to college, and then I had to read a lot for that.
You went to college in Iceland?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where I got I trained as a ship's officer. I went to navigation college.
So there was a lot of written work in that.
There was a lot of navigation and maths and ship stability and maritime law and yeah.
Wow, you are definitely fluent in Icelandic. What is it? Is it called Icelandic? Or
yes, it is. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. You're a criminal novelist in your own right, and an excellent one. I have read.
Oh, thank you. And I've read yours as well.
Thank you. Do you tend to only translate Icelandic crime? There's your book, for one of your books.
Oh, there's one of mine in Icelandic. Yeah, Helkuldískar. Yes.
Which one's that one?
That's it's Cold Malice.
That's the one I've read, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the last one.
Oh, is it?
It,
Oh, I don't know whether I read the last one or one of
yeah,
the earlier ones.
no, but that's the last one of that series.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you tend to only translate Icelandic then? Icelandic.
Yes. Yeah. I
Oh,
can't.
sorry, crime fiction. I
Uh,
finished the sentence.
no, I do other stuff as well. I translated a lot of technical stuff, news articles and things like that, which are dull but demanding, because you have to know things like the difference between a crankshaft and things like that. Knastos and a Sveveros, whatever they're called in English, I can't remember. But there's a
So,
lot of words that I don't know in English, especially all the maritime stuff, because I trained there. I trained in Iceland, and half of my maritime career was in Iceland as well. So there's lots of things that I've no idea what they're called in English. So when I need to find out what they are, I have to go and look things up.
right.
Yeah.
So that leads on really well to the next question, which is how easy or difficult is the translation process of Icelandic to English? How much, as they say, is lost in translation?
Ooh. Process depends on the subject matter. Yeah, it depends entirely what the subject matter is, how difficult or easy it is, and how old the subject matter is. Because Icelandic has actually changed quite a lot in the last couple of decades.
Right.
And I translated one book that was written in the 50s, which was a lot of fun, but the language has changed so much in the meantime that it was really challenging because there are so many words in there that are no longer used, so many antique expressions, or what feels like antique expressions, even though it was only written 60 years ago. But what was the question again?
How easy or difficult is the translation process from
Um,
Icelandic to English, and how much
oh, right. I
kind of
mean,
lost in translation for crime fiction, for instance?
the one I'm working on at the moment is really challenging because it's got the ancient Norse gods transposed to a dystopian version of the present, and it's got dwarves and elves and giants on all these things. So it's a real that's become a huge learning process.
Well, I love the sound
It's
of
got
the story.
giants with bazookas in it. It's great.
That's fascinating though that the language has changed so much.
It has, yeah.
Do you think our English language has changed as dramatically?
I think it has, but the older language is more accessible, if you like. I mean, you see films in this from the 50s and 60s that don't the language doesn't appear to be particularly from a bygone age in the same way that it would be in Icelandic. It's quite strange. But yeah, the other part of it, yeah, there's always something that you lose in translation. I think that's inevitable, but there's also things you can slip in translation as well,
Um,
and the things you have to slip in translation as well, um, because an Icelandic writer they write for their own readership, so you have to preferably with an editor, you have to slip in odd lines here and there. So you have to say Morgunblaðið, and you have to explain that somewhere in that sentence that's a newspaper, and it's preferably a posh newspaper, because and a readership outside Iceland wouldn't automatically know. And
right.
sometimes you have to drop in description as well, because everybody in Iceland knows what the Parliament building or the cafe by the harbour looks like. They don't need to describe it, but but we do. So you have to try and slip that kind of stuff in as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what about time? Is it like copying text from one document to another, or is it more difficult than that?
It's it's not like copying text from one to another.
It doesn't
It's
sound like it.
no, it's not. You can't. There's no direct translation. It's interpretation rather than a translation, because you're essentially retelling the story in the words the author would have used if they'd written it in your language, or or the words you hope they would have used if they'd written it in your language.
I heard that phrase in a movie recently. It's
Oh,
interpretation rather than translation.
yeah.
And I can't remember the movie.
Oh.
Um,
Whereas if you're translating a handbook for an outboard motor, then that would be much simpler in some ways, because it has to be very precise and very close to the original. But when it becomes to fiction, then there's a much greater leeway of interpretation that has to go into it to get the it's not it's the feel of what the author wanted to convey that you're trying to achieve, rather than the precise words.
yeah. A more personal question that just came into my mind, and mind is the subject matter. Do you think in English or Icelandic?
Both.
Right, that must be strange. But well,
And
that's coming from somebody that has only lived in one country. I'm not somebody that has really a
yeah,
dual heritage kind of situation.
and there are dreams in both as well.
Really? That's really fascinating. I love that. That kind of thing really fascinates me. I love it. Okay. We're coming to the end now. Are you working on anything of your own at the moment?
Yes, I am.
Oh, right. So what can readers look forward to?
Um, Not very much. Not very much. I can't say too much at the moment, but
But you
it's
are
something
working on something.
I'm definitely well, I've finished working on something,
Oh,
and
right.
it's being looked at by a publisher,
So it's
but
going to close, is it?
no, no,
They've
we have things to discuss, but it's a very good chance it won't appear in English.
Oh,
Yeah, because it's a publisher in Iceland, and they want to translate it into Icelandic and publish it there, and then it might come later in English.
oh, well, fingers crossed for that then.
So yeah, but if it all goes ahead, it will be a series, because
Oh, brilliant.
they want three.
Um, this will probably go to Solveig as well. What's the Icelandic market like? Is it a big market? Are they big crime fiction readers?
Yes, it's a healthy market. But there are so many crime writers in Iceland now. It's astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, you
It's
can't.
not a very big country, is it? And there's a lot
No,
of crime.
it's the size of Croydon, but it's a lot nicer. Nobody here from Croydon, is that? No, okay.
No.
But
Okay.
yeah, 20 odd years ago, there was very little crime fiction. Well, there was a lot of crime fiction, but it was all translated. And there were very few Icelandic crime authors. There was Arnaldur and Yrsa and Viktor Arnar, maybe one or two who were just starting at the time. But the bestseller lists were topped by Desmond Bagley and people like that. No, I'm going back a bit further, 30 years maybe. And the local crime writers didn't really get off the ground until they started to be published abroad.
Mm.
And then it sort of took off in a big way. And now you can't throw a brick in Reykjavik without hitting a crime writer.
Yes. Um, where
Not that
can
you want
readers?
to hit a crime writer, because they're lovely people.
I know they are. They really are. Um, Where can readers find you online?
Grauskakur.com. Yeah, or just search for me. Just search for my name. That will bring it up.
Yeah. Do any of the members have any questions that I may have missed that they want to ask?
Because we need to move on to the real star of the show, which is Sólveig.
Okay. Thank you for that, Quentin. I will do Sólveig's bio that I have from Coriolis's website, which I have truncated a little bit.
Okay.
Sólveig lives in Reykjavik and is married with 3 children and 2 grandchildren. She is a trained actor and has performed in theatre, television and radio. She holds a bachelor's degree in literature from the University of Iceland, along with a degree in teaching. Her first novel, The Actor, was published in 2012 to rave reviews and weeks at the top of the bestsellers list. It is now being developed as a motion picture. Silence was published in 2019 and won the Icelandic Drop of Blood Award for the year's best crime novel and was shortlisted for the Nordic Glass Key Award. So thank you for joining us, Sólveig. I am going to hand over to Marina for this Q&A. So thank you again for joining us.
So, Sólveig, I actually saw you in one of the Stella Blomqvist TV series. I saw you as an actress, so that was quite a surprise when I saw you. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did you, coming from such a different background, how did you get into writing, and in particular into writing crime fiction?
Yeah, hello all. Thank you for having me, and thank you for reading my book, and thank you, Quentin, for bringing my works and all the authors to Britain. Thank you so much to the English-speaking people, and I hope you will understand my English, because my second language was Danish. I'm that old. And now I have 4 grandchildren, not 2.
Wow.
But turning to writing, I think I just had it in me. I need to create, and I was always writing something. When I was working as an actress, I had radio programs. I had to write something. I was writing some small monologues and things like that. And then when I started teaching, which I did for 17 years, I did a lot of, material for my students. So, but after teaching for 17 years, and when my children were young, I needed the money, the monthly paycheck, the regular money. I thought it was enough, and I had written my first book, and it went well. I got it published, and it was, yeah, it made a good thing. It was really quite a start for me. So I took the chance and kept on writing. And, I could always turn back to teaching if I wanted to. So, but I did not. And now I've just finished my 8th novel. And it's a crime story. It's Guðgeir, yes. Yeah. I've written, this is number 7 about Guðgeir and his crew, but I have written one memoir that was published 2020, and that was quite a different writing. Yeah.
But you enjoy crime fiction more than memoir, it sounds like.
I enjoy both, and I enjoy all kinds of writing. I think I just started with crime fiction, and I liked it. You know, I thought about these characters. They came to my mind. I started to think about them, and you know, somehow they developed in my mind. And I think my training as an actor, as an actress, you know, helped me a lot. And then I came on with this plot and started writing. And you know, it's quite an exciting thing to write crime novels. You know, you have to be able to put on some riddles, you know, and like I love doing crosswords, you know. So you know, making all these different things up and try to make them stick together, you know. And then yeah,
you enjoy the puzzle element of
I
it.
enjoy the puzzle, but mostly I enjoy creating characters, you know.
Yeah.
And I need to think about all their lives, you know. Like when I was acting, I needed to, you know, the backstory. I needed to know how their childhood was, you know. In my I just imagined it, you know, and what has happened to them. So, you know, I enjoy that a lot.
Now, for Silenced, I wanted to ask you what your inspiration for it was, because it's got this theme of particularly women being silenced, isn't it? And I think we think generally that Iceland is a land, it was a very egalitarian society, that women are very strong there and so on. So what inspired you to show us a slightly different image of Iceland?
Thankfully, we are, you know, these things are in mostly good, you know, way, in a good path, but not, you know, there need to be more done, you know. And there are so many women that have been silenced through the years. And the Me Too movement, you know, Silence was out in Iceland 2019. So I was writing it the year and a half before. And I read a lot of Me Too stories. And it made me think about so many things that happened when I was young, and to my friends and family members, and you know, I'm from that generation that where sex offenders, they, you know, it was just too hard to press charges against it. And you talk about that things are good in Iceland, but it's so in so short time. Small towns, they, you know, they were all Quentin, hvað aftur meðvirkur? They were all
enabled. They're enablers.
Enabled, yes, you know. So maybe everybody knew something, but nobody spoke up. Nobody said anything. And you know, that's not far away. This is happening today. We know that. Even though things have gotten better through the years. And then I read a lot of novels, and I watch television shows and films where things like rapes are it's shown in a very graphic way, but you never ever show the impact of the woman, Muslim women, or you never see. What I want to say is I just avoid unnecessary descriptions of violence, but I prefer to show the impact on the person who has to go through it, the effects of her or his life. Do I make myself clear?
Yeah.
I think that is so it's so important. You have to get the whole picture. Yeah. So yeah,
So
the consequences on the victim, it's themselves. Yes.
Yeah,
So
which is
I try
not
to do
always
that.
seen. Yeah.
Yeah. And it helped me a lot that I worked with when I was a teacher. I worked in a school. I was teacher in a school for rehabilitation in education. People that have gone through difficult things like sickness or drugs or some horrible things. So I got to know. I've heard many stories. So, and I've seen the consequences. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say that in every book of yours, you address different issues, but there are always these difficult issues that we like to kind of sweep under the carpet, right? Yeah. So is there any particular, did you find anything particularly challenging other than the subject matter, either in creating the characters, maybe the influences? Did you know a lot of influences when you created the character?
Yeah. During that time, the world of these social media influencers, it was getting bigger and bigger. And I thought, this is an interesting thing. I didn't know a lot about it before I started, but I started following some of them, and reading interviews and, doing this research work I always do. And it was quite interesting. And the scene in Silenced where Andrea goes to the dentist, but she gets this black back, but the scene when she's trying to do she is trying to do her thing with the social media after being with a dentist, which is paid for. I have never done this before, but the few lines are almost directly from one of the social media influencer. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting world. I don't want to.
You don't want to go there. You don't want to become a social media influencer.
I think it's so silly. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Not good for your brains. No.
Well, possibly also dangerous, as we've seen.
Yes. Quite stupid.
So can I ask you a little bit about your writing process? You said that you like to get into the mind of your characters. Do the characters come to you first, or does the plot? Do you tend to plan it a lot beforehand?
I think the characters comes first. Yes. And then I picture them in somewhere or in some certain environment, and then I work from there. And nowadays I tend to I draw up, the huge lines, you know, I make them the important dots, you know, on the way.
Yeah.
And then I start, but
Mhm.
but then things changed.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
But,
So you have like an outline of the novel, but with some turning points, but then it
yes,
never
yes.
quite works out exactly as you planned.
Exactly, and you have to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just like improvising.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need to, you know, listen, and you need to be quick, and you need to change a lot, but you need to keep the main you know where you're going. You need to know where you're going, but you have to be flexible, otherwise you'll miss some interesting and good things that are good for the story.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And the final question is, because we've heard that from a lot of readers that they really like, and I'm probably going to pronounce it incorrectly, Guthga?
Yeah, good kid.
As you say.
Yeah.
And was it a deliberate intention to make him very different from the often quite depressed Scandinavian detective that we often see on our TV screens? Maybe
Yes,
drinking
it
too
was.
much alcohol and all that kind of thing.
Yes, it was. Because I hate stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stand them. And, you know, I know few people in the police. And, you know, they're just ordinary family guys, you know, even though they have to handle difficult cases, and it can be hard on them, of course. But this cliche with the, you know, the guy in a bad mood who drinks too much, you know, and, you know, takes drugs or something, you know, who can solve a, you know, he can't, you can't even believe that these guys can, you know, stay awake for the next hour. So yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sólveig. Any other questions from anybody else from our group?
No. Okay. Thank you very much, Sólveig, and thank you, Quentin, for taking the time a little bit longer than we said it might be. So thank you. I hope we haven't interrupted your evening too long.
Not at all, no. Thank you for having us.
Interrupted your eruption, volcanic eruption. You might want to go and film it or something.
I'm going to watch the TV because there's a volcano eruption started just 3 hours ago now.
I'm going to have to look that up when we've finished here.
Yeah.
Yes. Take a look. But thank you all, and thank you for reading my book. And I just want to say one thing, that talking about being silenced, the end of the book is symbolic. I had to end it that way because it's symbolic for so many cases and people I know. But thank you.
I did have a question. I wrote it down. You may have seen me scribbling. And it was the book was called Silenced, but by the end, did you feel empowered?
Did I feel empowered?
Having written the story through the Me Too.
Thank you so much. This is a great question. Very good question. Thank you. Yes, I think so. Because I always try in my books to speak up for the powerless in one way or another. And even though the ending is like it is, I'm not going to say anything about that, but it's more symbolic for all the cases, all the victims and all the sex offenders that, you know, were never caught.
No.
So
They're not
yeah.
all caught,
So
are they?
yes, it empowered me.
Yes.
And thank you for a great question.
Thank you for joining us,
Thank you.
both of you.
Okay, thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
If you want to see the eruption, there's a live feed from the on the Icelandic state TV website.
Is there? I shall look that up, Quentin. Thank
Yep.
you. Definitely.
ruv.is.
RUV.
Yeah, ruv.is. There should be a live webcam somewhere.
I shall check that out. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Well, so far, what I've seen looks a bit anticlimactic. Apparently, it's just a bit of smoke. But you know, I'm sure it can better that than stopping all the flights in Europe.
Well, yes,
right?
the one in 2010 that she mentioned was a bit dramatic. So that was very interesting. I was fascinated that Quentin can think and dream in 2 languages. I think people that have lived in 2 countries for any period of time like that and can do that, their brains must just be fascinating. Because I think the brain is just fascinating anyway. So yeah, I love that that happens. And I might have to put that in my notes somewhere. Sorry? What was that? What? Was that you, Clark? What was that strange? That was a male and it wasn't Clark.
It's a ghost.
You heard it wasn't just me.
I also heard it. It sounded Icelandic, so yeah, it was an Icelandic ghost.
Very strange. There's nobody else here though, is there? We'd be able to see them. Okay, let's carry on as if we haven't been freaked out.
13 participants, so yeah, it shouldn't be.
Okay then. Yes, that was interesting. So I think we've lost a couple of members, but we are knocking onto the usual time we log off anyway. It's going to be a bit of a longer one if people have got the time. So I'll start with the usual question. I'll try to keep it a bit shorter this evening because we are running long. Thank you for logging in late. Next month, I should be able to log in at 8 o'clock as usual. Did you enjoy the book?
Yeah.
Thumbs up from Clark. Yes, some nodding. Is there any enthusiasm in those yeses? Clark seemed happy. Did anybody dislike it then? We're not getting much. Okay, Clark, you're the only one that's given me any actual enthusiasm. Do you want to tell me what you liked about the book?
Sorry, my bloody phone keeps going off. Apologies.
No, that's fine.
Let me silence this bloody thing. Sorry about that. What did I like about it? Well, I thought it was pretty decent. I mean, it was pretty decently written. Funnily enough, I really liked the socials bit, which slightly surprised. You know, there was nothing in there that really surprised me, but it was actually quite, you know, it was actually nice to have that in there. I thought that was good. Yeah, I mean, I you know, there was nothing I really sort of thought was, you know, it was a perfectly okay, perfectly well written, perfectly sensible, entertaining, kept me awake for a few hours. You know, it was absolutely fine. It was I put book 1 on my reading list, so I might get around to that as well. You know, I thought it was not a work of genius, but you know, absolutely fine. You know, I quite happily read others from the series.
Yeah.
Does that summarize my
you
my
have
enthusiasm?
started us off wonderfully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else now want to say what they
I've also
Go on,
I've
Vera.
also enjoyed it. I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is really bad because I'm not at home, but I actually
You're
enjoyed
never at home, Vera.
I'm never at home. It's true. I'm not at home. My Wi-Fi is a bit, but I've enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of all these Nordic writers because the culture is very different, especially from my culture because I'm Portuguese and the southern culture. The culture is very different, and it shows in these novels. Like even in this one, okay, the detective is a nice guy, but then is also like making his removal, putting the floor, doing all this work. So he's focusing on the crime, but at the same time, he has also lots of things going on in his normal life, which is a bit different from some other crime novels where the detective is just obsessed with the crime. So yeah, I enjoyed the characters. I could tell that the writer enjoys developing the characters because they actually had like a life outside the case and everything. Yeah, it was a nice read.
It seems we are looking at a nice, steady book. Nobody seems to have any real strong emotions about it. Do we have any? Go on.
Not something I dislike, but one of the things that surprised me about it, and I do apologize, I had another bloody phone call when Quentin was talking and I couldn't listen to him, but you might have touched on this. But one of the things that slightly surprised me was, you know, I was surprised there wasn't more kind of Icelandic culture in it, actually. You know, it was, for something that was set in Iceland, I thought it was reasonably generic. I expected more, you know, pickled puffin eating, you know, from my Icelandic books, you know.
That's
slightly surprising.
Yeah, that is actually one of my questions following on from did you enjoy it and why not? Or why not? Is did Iceland feel like its own character? Did you get a sense of place? And I think maybe, do you think that's because when British writers are writing about their own cities, it's just their natural sense of home, so they don't feel they have to elaborate? I mean, some do have very much a sense of place, but some it's just a place and they focus on the characters. But to us, we want Iceland to feel like Iceland, but they're just writing about home.
I mean, also one of the things
they're not writing for the foreign market who are interested in their country.
So one of the things that surprised me about my view that there wasn't enough Icelandic in it is that, and you touched on it when you were talking to them, you know, Iceland is the size of Croydon. You know, if you're an Icelandic writer and you know, okay, if you're an artist, you may not care, but if you want sales, you're going to have to appeal to an international market. And I think if you're an Icelandic author, one of the ways you do that is by having Icelandic culture front and center in your book.
Yeah, I think I asked about what the crime fiction market was like in Iceland, but actually there's quite a big market for Icelandic crime outside of the country, because we are all fascinated with the country, with the volcanoes and the blue lakes, or the whatever colour lakes they are, and the lagoons and what have you. So I agree that we do want some of that in the books, and I have seen some of that played more in some others. Go on, Lorna.
Well, I was just going to say that it's actually, I thought it was quite a refreshing change that I didn't have to have a rural landscape described to me, that this was a situation that was going on in a city, and it showed that in these days most cities are very similar, and it doesn't have to be you know, putting in pickled puffins. I don't really eat pickled puffins.
Herring, maybe. But it's interesting that you say that, because her first book, The Fox, does take place in a remote location, you know, and has all of that kind of atmosphere, and even elves and little people and things like that, so, or people who believe in them. So yeah, so that one is very, you know,
so
and
so if you're going for that one, then
there you'll get
will
as
enjoy that
Icelandic
more.
as it gets.
Fantastic. I made up the pickled puffin, by the way.
No. So here, obviously, it was the urban environment, and it's because it's this wealthy family, and, you know, yeah. And then the next one takes place in the Westermann Islands, which is not that far away from Reykjavik, but again is a very touristy place and so on. So if you want to get the different atmospheres, you know, then it's the other two books. But I think this one, she was deliberately trying to do something different.
Yeah, so I suppose Reykjavik is just like any city in any main city in any country.
And as Quentin said, the language has changed so much because of the huge Western, American particularly, influence. They've got an American airbase there, you know, and so they've kind of taken on board wholeheartedly the whole European, West European and American culture.
I think their tourist industry is really healthy, isn't it, for such a small place? Okay, does anybody else, before we move on with the questions, want to say anything on how what they thought generally? No. Okay, the theme this month was one-word titles, and this was silenced. Sólveig did mention that we were talking about women being silenced. It's a strong word. Do we think it fulfilled its announcement in the title? Oh, I think you must have muted yourself, Margaret.
I think the women that were silenced almost were in the background, just didn't take as much of a role as I thought they might have done.
Okay, what about, yeah. What did you want to see more of?
Well, particularly the girl in prison. I mean, she was the original character who sort of brought everything up, and she was almost invisible, wasn't she?
But she was a bit in the background, because there were lots of discussions about her. It's true that we didn't hear much from her, but we heard about her, and all the flashbacks were about her.
She was almost silenced, wasn't she? She was silenced all the way through it, which I think was a shame.
I suppose that says something in itself.
Yeah.
I should also point out that the original title in Icelandic was something like shackles. So, but they were metaphorical shackles, obviously. So we decided, instead of putting shackles as the title and having people expecting to see somebody, you know, shackled to
Locked in a
something.
cage or something.
Yeah, exactly. We thought it might make more sense to translate it as silenced.
Oh, I much prefer silenced.
Mm.
I know,
Because
I think the idea of the emotional shackles is more descriptive of the book.
Yeah, but you would have to explain that it's
Yeah, I
emotional
appreciate
shackles.
that, yes.
Otherwise, people would go, "Oh no, it's going to be somebody tortured," and no, we don't want that.
Yeah, yeah. How did Sólveig? How quiet is that G on the end?
I've heard it more like Sólveig.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning, but then she said it more with a G, because I went to YouTube to make sure I said it properly, and it was Sólveig, but then she seemed to put a G on it herself.
Yeah, she's probably used to hearing it pronounced in both ways.
Maybe she was just being nice to you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I went to YouTube to make sure I pronounced the name properly. Anyway, she said that it was written because of the Me Too movement. So how, bearing in mind we are generally 90% here today, a female crowd, how did the book make you feel? Did it connect with you in the way she wanted it to? On any emotional level at all? We're not getting any emotional depth from this book, are we?
I think it's always sad to read about these themes. I think it's hard for me. It's harder to read about rape than it's about when I read about murder.
Yeah.
For me, it's easier to read about murder than rape. So yeah, in terms of the crime, for me, it was worse to read about rape than crime. So yeah, in that sense, yeah, I felt more engaged with the book.
Yeah, I agree, Vera. I also think she did it well because it wasn't on the page, because when Elsa was attacked, it wasn't on the page. So it wasn't a graphic, here, have this in your face. But so I don't know whether you would have preferred it to be more dramatic, or whether you actually liked the way she did it that way.
I think it's well done when you are able to convey the message without unnecessary graphic description, because some of the books are very graphic and some of the movies also, and it doesn't necessarily improve the movie or the book. So sometimes it's better to describe less. So yeah, I felt bad for Elsa, because obviously Elsa was a nice character and she built the character, and then suddenly this happens to her and we all feel sad about her. I felt bad. So yeah.
Right, let's move on from the sensitive subject, shall we, and try and get some discussion. Were you kept guessing as you were reading about who may be responsible?
No.
You weren't guessing because you weren't interested, or?
No, I thought it was just so obvious.
Did you?
Yeah. To me, this is one of these crime novels that isn't so much a crime novel, it's a book about a lot of things and it's just hung on a crime, if you see what I mean. It's not a whodunit or such, like it could almost go into different genres, because it is more an exploration of the whys rather than the whos.
So did everybody realise who and how it had been done.
I mean, it took
to
me
the
about halfway
reveal.
through to really, put it all together.
I thought it might have been the elderly detective who'd killed Johannes after his niece was attacked.
Okay. So nobody was particularly surprised by the reveal.
And I don't think that was necessarily a weakness of the book.
I don't think it is a weakness of the book.
What is that? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that.
Somebody
I
said
think it was an echo from Clark.
Is it an
Sorry,
echo
that
from
was
me?
me.
All right, okay.
Was that you, Janet?
Yeah, sorry, it was me. I think I've got something wrong here with my mic. It doesn't seem to be working very well. But I was just agreeing with Clark and saying I don't think it was. I don't think it mattered that there was whether the reveal was, like a twist or anything like that. I think you built up the story as you went through it, as it came, and as Lorna said, it's one of those books that isn't necessarily. It's not a who done it. It's not a. It's more why, how did this come about, and so it does lead on to the silence thing, if you like, or the shackles that brought about what happened. Does that make sense? I'm not even sure I'm making sense now, but that's, I think it all leads into each other, and it doesn't matter that there was no, even if you knew halfway through the book or not who did it, it was all the rest of it that had to come with it that explained what happened to these people and why they were in the situations they were, and so on.
Okay. Shall we talk about the ending with Franson and what's his name? Davy. Who were you surprised by the way that it ended?
I was disappointed. Yes, I would have liked him to have to face up to those crimes. In a way, well, the family certainly got away with it, didn't they? They covered it all up and they get away with it.
And what about?
Yeah.
Sorry, who was that?
No, I was just sort of agreeing.
Perhaps that was part of the silenced. That the in a sense, justice has been silenced in the end of this book.
Yeah.
Which I know is not hugely satisfying, because when you read crime novels, you kind of, at least there, you want to see justice done if you don't get to see it anywhere else in real life. But yeah.
Let's speak to Sandra. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. What did you feel about Franson's actions during the conversation with Davy? Well, I'll leave that as an open question. What do you feel about his actions? Because he was a police officer in that conversation.
It was difficult, wasn't it? Because there wasn't a lot he could do because there was no evidence. But I felt they should have gone looking for something, if that makes sense, because you did want an ending that, like you say, you want it all neat and tidy, and you wanted people to suffer for what they'd done. But it just felt a bit like he didn't have the evidence to go and do anything about it, or perhaps didn't look for the evidence that he could have done something about it. But that's my opinion.
Well, he tried to strangle him. He could have arrested him for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, well, I don't know what Icelandic law is like, so I don't know what their burden of proof is.
Yeah.
But then you are sort of left at this sort of hung point. So you don't really know what's going on after the novel's finished. You know, whether anything is followed up.
But how long between putting him in the concrete and the building going up at the end?
Yeah.
There is a period of time between him telling Franson and that end scene where the building has gone up, where it doesn't look like they've done anything. She just says, I want to drive over him.
But is that not more a device of the author to sort of, Elsa gets her justice by driving over him. Whereas you would have to drag it out for an awful longer, going into the sort of mundane of picking up bits of evidence to try and do it. And from what I can gather of reading media and such like, that the victims are never treated sympathetically in court. So therefore it would have had even more impact on these characters that you've grown to like. So maybe this was the only way that she could give Elsa a bit of closure.
So were people satisfied with the way that it ended?
Yeah, I think so, because
have to be tied up in a bow.
Yeah, I was satisfied because at the end, okay, he was killed by his own family probably, and it would have been probably difficult to prove he was the rapist. So some kind of justice was made. The family got away, it's true.
His family are complicit in the crimes.
Yeah, and the family got away.
Yeah. That's the problem with the ending.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I do like a novel that doesn't finish in a very tidy way. I like things to be explained, but I don't mind when it doesn't finish with everybody behind bars and justice has been served and everything. So yeah, for me, was a nice ending.
I agree, actually. I only listened to the ending this morning and I was surprised, but I liked the fact that it was different. And not
because I thought he had escaped, to be honest. With the jet skis and all this story, I was like, okay, so this guy has escaped. Because I started suspecting the cousin, but then I was like, he's not the cousin, it's Johannes, needs to be Johannes. So, but I thought he had escaped. So at the end, I was happy that he was actually dead.
I put a note. I keep notes while I'm reading to remember what I'm doing at the meeting. And one of the things I came back to when I realised who it was when Davy was caught with his fingerprint at the window, was he had admitted to being a peeping Tom, which was a bit on point because Tom had done it. So I just thought that was amusing. But that was just me. So would you read any more books by this author?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, we've got quite a few yeses. That's good. Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. I shall not press end. Don't press end Rebecca. So